That's Brian and Brian.
Awesome. You've up. I see. I think Jennifer's here. Very cool. I'm going to hit record. I'm just going to, guys, welcome. As you're coming in, I see we got a few more people kind of waiting to come in. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Give us a shout out using the chat. Let us know where you're calling from. I see Ian McCallan is here. Hi, Ian. I see Alexa is here. Hi, Alexa.
Hi.
Nice to see everyone. Jennifer, is that you on the phone? Up, so she's trying to find one of our authors is here, but she's in the waiting room. This has not happened before where I can't find the waiting room all of a sudden.
Is he frozen?
Zoom is, here we go. Cool, we are live. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to check in with one of our authors because she is she's a little stuck. This kind of stuff happens, you know, technical difficulties. Bear with us. It's nice to see so many familiar faces here. Hello, Jesse Chafee. Hello, Hannah Bay. Hello, Miranda Beverly Whittemore. So many authors in the house. I'm seeing some return names as well. Laura, thank you for coming back. Very cool. You guys give us 1 second. I'm just going to see if Jennifer's able to get to kind of figure out her technical difficulties. And then we'll get started in just 1 minute. You know, make sure you've got a drink handy.
Yeah, everyone tell us what your drinks are in the chat.
Yeah, what's your drink or your snack?
Yeah, I want some drink hype.
I realized I forgot to tell my bartender to get me a drink, but maybe after I read.
I've learned some really good cocktails from at least watching Danielle's Instagram.
Well, that's all Alex, who's upstairs, but you know, he's in my top right. I don't know. There he is. That's my resident bartender. So
a New York sour, I think, being my favorite.
Yeah, we were pretty into that.
Kind of like a whiskey sour with a little bit of a wine float on top. It's really nice.
Jesse's got the bubbly. I like that. It's good.
Oh, Prosecco. Oh, vodka tonic. Lukewarm coffee.
You know.
Here's how I like to party. And this is really indulgent. This is only for the mad wealthy or the wasteful. Have a Prosecco with a little bit of prosciutto, and then it's your own secret joke. And then
We lost Audrey.
Lost Audrey.
Oh, if I'm back now, that was just a real bad prosciutto prosecco joke. It doesn't.
All right, well, we're gonna get started, and hopefully Jennifer will figure out what's happening on her end very, very soon. Yeah, it's very important to have a resident cocktail mixologist in the house. I think that cocktails and cookies have been getting me by. So welcome everybody. I'm Brian Gresco. Welcome to the Antibody, a quarantine reading series coming to you on LitHub's virtual book channel. Shout out to Ian McKellen, who I already said hi to. Ian covers online events at the Rumpus, and he called this the longest running quarantine reading series, which is awesome. And this is episode 6. So I guess we've been here in Brooklyn in quarantine for 7 weeks at this point. And these events have been a real highlight for me to just kind of put aside the news, put aside the too quiet city, to just bask for a little while in the words of artists and talk a little bit about their work. Last night I enjoyed a cookie and sat with my phone in my lap and listened and watched the readings at Franklin Park at their first digital event, which was wonderfully curated as always by Panina Roth, who I see is in the audience tonight. And that was just such a nice treat. So I hope that you guys have something nice for yourself, whether it's Prosecco or lukewarm coffee, and that you will just join me in kind of taking a breath and just settling in, because we have 3 really fantastic authors joining us tonight. Danielle Lazarin is here. Hi, Danielle.
Hi.
And Audrey Olivero is here. Hi, Audrey.
Hey, what's up?
And if you've joined us before, Jennifer Rosner will hopefully be joining us. She's having some trouble. I've heard from a few other people here tonight that it was a little tough getting online. So I'm not sure what, I know Zoom is like overwhelmed with demand right now. So hopefully Jennifer will figure things out. She's working on it on her end. But we're gonna get started with who's here. If you've joined us before, welcome back. If you're new, this is how it works. For now, your microphones are on mute, and I ask that you please keep them that way. We don't have a stage, but we do have a mic, and we're going to honor the authors when they have it. And each author is going to read for us for a little bit. And at the end of the event, there will be time for a Q&A, which you can use your mic then or use the chat. But just be ready for that. So if you've got some questions, you'll have a chance to ask them. The chat is public so that you can show your appreciation of the authors. So please get your keys clicking and your fingers tapping for our first author of the evening, Danielle Lazarin. Danielle is the author of the short story collection Backtalk, which is an amazing collection. I am in absolute awe of short story authors, and Danielle is a master. Her fiction can be found in the Southern Review, BuzzFeed, Colorado Review, Indiana Review, Glimmer Train, 5 Chapters, Boston Review, and elsewhere. Her nonfiction has been published by the New York Times, The Cut, and Lenny Letter. She is a graduate of Oberlin College's creative writing program. Woohoo! And she received her MFA from the University of Michigan, where her stories and essays won Hopwood Awards. She has received grants from the New York Foundation for the Arts and the Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance, and she lives in her native New York, where she's raising her daughters and working on a novel. Hello, Danielle.
Hello. Now that's somewhat out of date because I've, in theory, finished that novel.
That's amazing. And that's where you're calling us from Uptown?
Yeah, from Uptown. So we live in Inwood, which is the true northern tip of Manhattan, which is beautiful and has a lot of parks, which is nice. And we always complain because it's such a low density neighborhood that like we don't have like a lot of takeout choices and stuff like that. But I have to say these days it's like pretty great to be in a space where there aren't as many people. Yeah, that's where I am. Yeah, Audrey and I were talking before. I can see most of what I'm looking at now is the Bronx out my windows.
Very cool. All right. Well, you have the microphone, Danielle. Take us away.
All right. So I'm gonna read from my novel for the first time ever. So this is like very much an experiment for me. I finished the novel. God, when did I finish this novel? I mean, I think I technically finished the novel in January or February. It's not even really finished. It's never finished, but finished enough to hand it off to my agent and tell her to go do things with it. I'm going to read actually from about 50 pages in. So I'm going to give you a little bit of setup. So hopefully not too much. I picked a section you should be able to follow along. The basic premise of the novel is it's an OBGYN who leaves her husband and very young infant child to go join an underground women's healthcare network, as one does. And her name is Julia. So we're about 50 pages in at this point. She is on the road. The novel is called The Pathways, and this network is called The Pathways. You're referencing the ways that all these different people connect, and you'll learn more about it as I read. So a few things you might need to know. So her name is Julia. She's been on the road for just a short time with this woman, Charlotte. So it's a scene between Julia and Charlotte. They reference this woman, Susan, who's the woman who recruited her and who trained her. So she comes up. Her husband's name is Marcus and her son's name is Ben, and that should be pretty apparent. And that's it. And since everybody always asks, because she is an OBGYN and the novel does concern itself with abortion rights, it's supposed to take place like tomorrow, basically is what I say for the time frame. In this world, Roe v. Wade still stands, but there's the access is shot, which is basically like where we are these days. So away we go. It was during their second month together, while Charlotte was inside a pharmacy doing a pickup, that Julia ended up holding someone else's baby boy. Julia had been driving. She'd gotten out of the car to stretch her legs. The pharmacy was sandwiched between a thrift store and a tackle shop. Julia wished she could be inside in the air conditioning, but she knew by now not to follow Charlotte in, that in small towns like this one, there wasn't much blending in. Julia inched herself closer to the small awning of the pharmacy, hoping to catch a bit of shade. It wasn't even 10 a.m. and the sun was blazing. The woman with the baby on her hip didn't even look at Julia when she'd begun to talk about rainstorms that had come through the region the previous week and how her yard was like a swamp for days. Thought it would be end times, the woman said, one arm hooked around the baby's bottom, his chubby knees pink with heat, her other arm digging into her large purse. Though Julia didn't recall where she'd been a week ago, or even which state they were in at that very moment, she went along with it. Yes, such a relief that they were over, she'd agreed. The woman began to mumble and then swiveled to Julia, shifting the boy in her direction. Be a dear and hold him, would you? Can't find these dang keys. The woman was already placing the boy into Julia's arms. Sure, she heard herself say. She delivered a few babies so far, but those were work. She caught them and passed them over. But this one was near about Ben's age. She knew it by the heft of him, by the muscle control as he settled into her arms and her own muscle memory. The baby reached for the loose ends of her ponytail resting on her neck. His small hands flattened the hair to her skin with her sweat as his mother dug into her bag for what felt like full minutes. The boy was blonde, nearly tow-headed, as Ben was dark, but his eyes, Julia thought, held the same cast as he locked into hers. As if he knew something about who she was, the boy squirmed. She welled up, wanting him off her. Keys triumphantly in hand, the mother reached for the boy. Come back to Mama, Carter, she said. She passed her eyes over all of Julia as she took him, only now a moment of distrust moving through them. You okay, ma'am? Julia could only nod, but a tear fell. She pretended it didn't, that it was sweat. Have a good day, she managed as the woman loaded Carter into a seat and drove away, not looking back. Charlotte came out of the pharmacy with 2 white paper bags and an irritated expression. She'd been watching from the line at the register. Julia got back into the car without a word and started the engine, trying to blink the tears away. Charlotte held an intimidating silence till they were back on the highway. What were you thinking? She finally asked. She just handed me the kid. I couldn't say no. You didn't have to make a scene about it. Julia began, but it only made the tears come harder. Watch the road, Julia, Charlotte warned. Julia saw Charlotte's eyes on the speedometer as it crept above the speed limit. She slowed and merged into the right lane from the middle one. What else was I supposed to do? Julia could hear her own desperation in her voice, how it veered into a new place, a new person she couldn't yet name. You can't talk to people. Do you know how easily the voice triggers memory? You two look like old friends out there. Don't get comfortable. You have to learn to be more careful. You have to learn how to control yourself. The whole of her training at Susan's house before heading out had been exit strategies. Susan impressing on Julia that the single most important thing to remember on the pathways was that there could be no visible threads between them, not between the providers and clients or suppliers or any friendly along the way. It's indefensible in a legal sense. We can't get you out. We can't give them an inkling that there are more of us. You're on your own. The pathways were built as a series of transactions, not continuous care. Money didn't touch providers' hands by design. Follow-up was handled by whoever came through next, and indeed, Julia and Charlotte spent as much time checking in on patients who had IUDs put in or had started dosages of antibiotics by other providers as they initiated those processes themselves. For Julia, the code of conduct on the pathways, for which there were no textbooks or policy manuals, were more difficult to absorb than the medical procedures, even the ones she had only studied and never practiced, that had quickly become routine in a few weeks' time. She learned by mistake and correction. For years afterwards, she'd hear Charlotte's voice in place of the notes she'd like to have taken. Change your hairstyle often. Don't wear distinctive clothing, especially shoes. Appear neither evasive nor friendly around non-clients. Do as much as you can solo. Do not present as too friendly or familiar with another provider. The idea of you and another woman as a couple is sure to raise more suspicion and vigilance than anything else. Drive like a saint. Signal at 3 a.m. at a suburban four-way stop sign. Keep your clothes and person clean. Work clean. Be as invisible as they'd wish we'd be. If danger arrived on the road between jobs, protocol was to split. You drive away without me, Charlotte had said just hours after meeting her. But what if, Julia began, but Charlotte cut her off. You drive on to the next job, Charlotte said. We can't afford to take others down with us. It's a war. There are bound to be losses. What, Julia couldn't help but wonder, had made Charlotte so willing to lose? What had she already lost? She didn't dare ask. They'd have to dig up what they'd buried. Charlotte, she guessed, was several layers deep by now. Getting in the car with her meant she was willing to do the same. If they were caught mid-job, the instructions were to do one more thing to maintain the patient's physical safety and run. The first job Julia had to abandon was when a father of a trans teen broke down the locked door to the room she and Charlotte sat in with his daughter and dialed the local police department while he blocked the door with his body, saying into the phone, "Come quick, someone is trying to hurt my son." Julia had already transferred the month's supply of hormones into a zippered pocket of the 17-year-old's backpack. She hoped her father wouldn't find them. She kissed her forehead before she left, apologizing. In the end, the father had just let them walk past him. Charlotte had insisted they walk, not run, to the car that was parked 6 blocks away, so as not to arouse suspicion. He's likely hung up, Charlotte said, a hand on Julia's wrist to slow her pace when she quickened it. When they got to the car, it took Julia 3 tries to get her shaking hands to properly align the key in the ignition. Sometimes, when she worried about the strength of an impression she'd made on a stranger, her thoughts circled to Ben, to wondering if he'd be able to remember any traces of her at all, how hard Marcus would work to erase them as Ben grew. Marcus had quickly drawn up divorce papers, Susan facilitating Julia's signatures as she'd promised she would when the time came. The documents had arrived at one of her stops and had been picked up within hours. He sent no messages along with the documents, no word of their son. This was what she'd asked for, a sharp and permanent cleaving of their family. But it hurt still, and she knew the best she could do was grow accustomed to the pain she'd chosen. Being useful was its own cure for heart sickness, and for the strange passage of time on the road, where there was only now and tomorrow, this job and the next. Though Julia had been learning how to integrate the sounds of a knock or dog's claws on hardwood floors outside the room where she was working, to tamp down the rise of panic and keep her hands and demeanor steady, She knew her sense of safety was deceptive. It was dangerous to believe in it too much. 2, she knew that she'd not just taken that baby from his mother, she'd reached for him. Charlotte was right. She'd needed to learn how to control herself, outsmart her weaknesses. I'll do better next time, she said in the car as they drove out of Texas. They drove for a few more miles before Charlotte said, "It gets easier, I promise, all of it." Her tone still sharp, but her voice itself softer. Who you are out here, it's not who you were, not even who you'll be at the next stop. Just stay mindful. It takes a bit of practice, learning how to not give yourself away. That's done.
Wow, thank you, Danielle. Thank you so much. And everyone show a little love for Danielle in the chat. That was amazing. Very cool. Oh my gosh, it's a war. There are bound to be losses. I don't know. It just hit me that. And anytime babies and families cleaved, I mean, it's visceral stuff. Thank you so much. Very cool. Yeah, I need a moment just to like kind of take that in. It's really cool.
Well, thank you for giving me the space to like share that here, because it's, you know, I feel like this is the right time and the right space to give people new things. And
Yeah, no, and it feels like it's in a good space to ready for a debut. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, when I was rehearsing though, it was like so funny because there's a line, it's like, what basically it's like, what is time, what are days? And I was like, yes, this obviously was written a long time ago, but I was like, that feels right.
Yeah, so much
There's no
about
sense of time or where she is in time.
Very cool. Thank you. I want to say hello to Jennifer Rosner. Jennifer, you're here.
I made it.
You made it. Welcome. Am I saying your last name
Thank you.
properly? Rosner? Is that?
Yep, that's right.
Yes. Great. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I know it sounds like I've heard from a couple other people on this chat here that it's Zoom was giving some difficulties tonight. So, but you're here. Thank you. The flowers look beautiful behind you. It's great. You're set up. Very cool. All right. Well, we're gonna move on to you're gonna be closing us out, but before that happens, we're gonna hear from Audrey. Hi, Audrey.
Hey.
Audrey, your video is not on.
Do you want it on? Does it need to be on? I can do that. It slows us down just a little bit when I leave it on, but
okay.
I'm alive. I'm here.
Yeah, hi. And we get to see your Breakfast at Tiffany's poster behind you.
It's a real wreck. We're in like a good corner.
Which is awesome. It's great. Audrey Olivero is a Puerto Rican writer and editor from the South Bronx. One of my favorite contemporary essayists. Her work has appeared in Long Reads, Carve, and Dovecote magazine. And she has named every pigeon she has ever met. But nowadays maybe sees more wildlife on Animal Crossing than she does in real life. I don't know. You tell me, Audrey.
Yeah, a lot more. I was actually thinking, because when you write personal essays, all of your writing tends to be bummers. And so I didn't want to read a bummer tonight. I wanted everyone to have like a nice little story time to escape reality, and just have a good time. And I thought about, like, within knowing I was gonna do this and like the weeks leading up to it, like, oh, I'm gonna write like an Animal Crossing or like funny essay, and it didn't happen because the world is garbage and we're all living in it. But if you are thinking about playing Animal Crossing, highly recommend it. It's adorable, and you can live the life that you cannot live right now.
That's awesome. All right, well, please, everyone, give Audrey a warm welcome. And yes, I see Jesse give a shout out to your Long Reads essay, which is amazing.
Oh, Jesse, that means so much. Also, Brian, everything you said means so much. Whatever, I love all of you.
All right, you got it. The mic is yours.
I'm gonna read a really short piece that I thought was the least bummer of them all. It is the closest I've gotten to fiction, and it was published in Dovecote some months ago. It is called Dear May, and it is about a dear friend. And here goes. Dear May, listen up, nerd. When are you gonna quit GGQ? I don't know how you can still stand it. I think about it every single time I start to hate my work. At least there's no Gigi. At least Gigi isn't breathing down my neck, accusing me of stealing, making me do inventory for the entire store every single day by hand, sometimes twice. Usually, let's be honest, I can take a lot of abuse. I don't know if I've matured or gotten a self-esteem or what, but you know, I don't miss that 5x7 torture box. And I can find an excuse to miss everything, even if it hurts me, especially if it hurts me. I miss my first retail job. I miss my dad sometimes. I miss the college where two guys on the basketball team followed my girlfriend and I around every single day because they'd caught us talking close outside a classroom, leaning in too far, making too much eye contact with too much sleepy calm. They followed us even after we broke up. But I still wish I'd taken a photography class, you know, gotten to know the other theater brats better. I get all nostalgic sometimes, which means I miss that too. Yeah, I don't get that way about GGQ. Which isn't to say things don't suck now. I'm trying to find the energy to come pick you up from work so that we can hang out. But by the time 6 rolls around, I'm so tired. Of what? Sitting at a desk, drinking bad coffee, overthinking. Anyway, nerd, when are you gonna leave GGQ and break up with your boyfriend like you've been meaning to for the past forever? I keep forgetting and then suddenly remember every time I actually see your face that I've been meaning to make your dating profile, your Tinder, your Bumble, your OnlyFans, whatever. I get 5 feet from the old store, strategizing how to pass in front of it and avoid being seen by Gigi herself. And it'll strike me, oh shit, she's gonna remind me that she's been meaning to break up with her boyfriend. Like I'd left the stove on somewhere. Like I should brace myself. Like maybe this time you'll bring it up again, but not chicken out because you don't post pictures of yourself online. And come on, it's okay to have selfies on the internet. Or, you know, it's not okay, but what's not doing it gonna get you? A boyfriend, which could be yours easy as pie because you're hot and funny and no one can tell what age you are. Which sounds like smoke up your ass, but it's true because I'm a good friend, but I'm not that good a friend. Like, you didn't know I had a girlfriend for a few years until just now. That's okay though, because I mostly didn't tell you because you're a little homophobic. Like you make homophobic jokes about some of the people that used to come to our store looking to buy some tights. Also, based on all that, I don't know if you'd really get what a bisexual is. Like, okay, you sound homophobic, but not like somebody that really knows how to hate queer people in a thorough way. I don't think you have anything more in you than thinking I make out with girls for attention and worrying I've been staring at your tits when your guard is down. I haven't. And like, I could see us having a moment where you really get it one day, but then I'd have to be honest about a girl that broke my heart during a really hard time in my life. And what the fuck? That heavy bullshit is too much for a bubble tea place that we like, or Forever 21, the places we float in and out of, or the Sunrise Mart where we get your groceries and my snacks, because no way is actual food gonna survive the ride back to the Bronx. I like those uncomplicated moments where I'm your friend and you're my friend, and we don't talk about what that means to either of us. Anyway, I charged my phone at the office before I left to meet you. I have a good feeling about today. We'll nab you a rich boyfriend and we'll never have to see the inside of GGQ again. I'll pick you up, bring down the gate one final time, and we'd wonder forever about the little boutique we were trapped in. Whether Alec Baldwin still fights with the paparazzi near our window display. Whether Gigi ever caught the rat that crawled in every night through the gap in our front door. Audrey, that is it.
Thank you, Audrey. That was awesome. It's like, I think the thing that it's like got that your work always just hits me. It's got that real vulnerable stuff that I look for in essays. I love it so much. And as someone who used to work like retail in a mall bookstore where, yeah, you'd like put down the gate at nighttime and walk people back to their cars and gossip and stuff like that, I was really feeling the whole retail vibe. So really, really cool.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, thank you. So cool. I'm gonna put in here if you guys want to read more, and there is Audrey's amazing essay on long reads. You should check it out, and you can find her on Twitter as well at Your Trusty Alibi. I've got some things to share of Danielle's too that I forgot in the heat of the moment, but I'm going to save that for a second and get to it in a minute. But cool, yeah, show Audrey some love. Thank you so much. We're just going to move right along to our final author of the evening, Jennifer Rosner. Jennifer is the author of If a Tree Falls, A Family's Quest to, sorry, I lost my place here. If a Tree Falls, sorry, Jennifer, A Family's Quest to Hear and Be Heard, a memoir about raising her deaf daughters in a hearing speaking world. Her children's book, The Mitten String, is a Sidney Taylor Book Award notable. Jennifer's writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Massachusetts Review, The Forward, Good Housekeeping, and elsewhere. She lives in Western Massachusetts with her family, and The Yellow Bird Sings is her debut novel and is being published around the world. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Are you calling us tonight from Western Massachusetts?
I am.
Awesome. Welcome. I hope you had it's here in Brooklyn, in New York City. It was a beautiful day. How was it where you are?
It was amazing. It was an amazing day. I was happy to be able to be outside.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you here with us tonight. So you've got it. The microphone is yours.
All right. Thanks for having me in such wonderful company. So yeah, this is my novel, The Yellow Bird Sings. I can put it up there for you if you can see the cover. It is about a mother and her 5-year-old daughter who are in hiding during World War II. And I think it at heart is about a connection, an unbreakable bond between a mother and child, and also about the role of creativity and beauty in human survival. So I'm just going to read a couple of passages. This is the prologue. The girl is forbidden from making a sound, so the yellow bird sings. He sings whatever the girl composes in her head, high-pitched trills of piccolo, low-throated growls of contrabassoon. The bird chirps all the musical parts save percussion, because the barn rabbits obligingly thump their back feet like bass drums, like snares. The lines for violin and cello are the most elaborately composed, rich and liquid smooth, except when fear turns the notes gruff and choppy. Music helps the flowers bloom. When the daisies grow abundant, the bird weaves a garland for the girl to wear on her head like a princess, though no one can see. She must hide from everyone in the village, soldiers, the farmhouse boys, the neighbors too. The lady with squinty eyes and blocky shoes just dragged a boy down the street and returned smug and straight-backed, cradling a sack of sugar like a baby. When giants tromp past, the bird holes up in a knot in the rafter, silent and still. Tending the garden must wait. The girl, music trapped inside, buries herself under hay. She imagines her mother whispering their nightly story, or whisper singing her favorite lullaby. She holds and tries to fall asleep, sniffing in vain for the faded scent of home. So this girl who's in the barn with her mother is very musical and just feels music pulsing inside her, but has to be silent. And she ends up conjuring this bird who can sing the songs she hears in her head. And then her mother, in an attempt to help pass the minutes and hours and days, tells her a nightly story of this brave girl and her bird. So that's sort of where that prologue came from. And this is I'll read two short scenes, one from the child's point of view and one from the mother's. Shira practices being invisible. She hunches her shoulders, sucks in her stomach, slinks like a cat. Her mother practices too, burying herself deep in the hay and beckoning Shira with a wave of her hand to settle into her lap and be still. Or with a finger to her lips, she instructs her to stay silent. The floorboards are rough and the hay is sharp and scratchy. Shira does not understand why they can't go home, why they ever left home, where together her mother and father tucked her into bed as if in a soft, downy nest, and where music and the scent of her grandmother's baking wafted through the air. There, Shira could patter down the hall and join the company, watching as they unclasped the cases of their instruments. Nestled in her grandfather's lap, breathing in his workshop smells of sawdust and lacquer, she bounced and tapped to the ripple of notes from her mama's cello, her tata's violin. At first, in the tuning and warm-up, everything sounded off kilter and sad. But then they struck up their songs, and the music carried them all, until Shira no longer felt herself settled against her grandfather, but in an altogether different place of pure shared beauty. Vibrant, soulful melodies, fiery stomping rhythms. It didn't matter how loud things got. There wasn't a neighbor in the building who didn't relish their playing. Shira could even hum if she wanted to. But here, her mother is insistent. They need to be silent, to hide. So she coils herself tight like a spring and holds herself in. Shira strives to mute the sound of every movement, her footfalls, her breath. The anticipated stream of her pee she has learned to mete out in a near silent trickle, and she knows to cover over and so erase any sign of her existence, a series of vanishing moments before she retreats beneath piles of hay. Yet even as Shira wills herself to silence, her body defies her with a sudden sneeze, an involuntary swallow, the loud crack of her hip from being still too long. A calf muscle cramps, an itch needs a scratch. Her bowels press. The most carefully planned movement causes the hay to rustle or a floorboard to whine. Shira looks over at her mother apologetically. Worried, her mother stares back. Shira settles into the hay and tries again to be still until notes, snippets of song, and soon whole passages take shape and pulse through her, quiet at first, then building in intensity and growing louder. A story told with strings and woodwinds, a glacial night, a flickering fire, sounds like black water beneath bright ice, basses and timpani and a violin's yearnings, and finally a crescendo, the frozen earth cracking. Her mother waves an arm, her forehead furrowed. Shira realizes she is tapping again. And then a little bit later on, when the barn is getting more and more unsafe, the farmhouse wife's name is Christina. The farmer's wife is Christina. Christina comes to the barn before dawn, her eyes focused on Shira. Is she asleep? Rosha nods. I think you should move her. What? For her safety. I know someone who is part of a network that hides children. Shira will be better off in a convent orphanage than in this barn. Rosha jolts to a stand, her legs tangling in hay as she takes a step backward, her thoughts ringing in protest. Absolutely not. I will never part with my girl. She hovers over Shira now to see if she's woken her. No, that the risks here have become too much to bear. The food supply is low, and Christina surely knows about Henrik's visits. She must see him duck into the barn on his way back from the tavern. Rosha combs the loft for their few possessions. She will collect Shira and get out now. To where, she does not know, only that it will be best for her and Christina both. I realize how much danger we've put you in. I'm sorry, Rosha says. She has seen Christina, her arms tight around Lukash's shoulders, ushering him away from the barn. Rosha, it is for her sake. The nuns will see to it that she gets exercise and schooling. She'll be far safer hidden among the devout. Rosha stops moving and stares hard at Christina. She has a kind face, deer-like. The curled blonde hairs at the nape of her neck, too short to be swept into her high bun, puff around her face like soft cotton. Is it her faith in her Christian God that drives Christina to make such an offer, or an emotional attachment to Shira? Perhaps she's dreamed of having a little girl. Could Christina be right, that Shira would be safer apart from Rosha? Rosha thinks of how treacherous the journey here had been, with Shira constantly needing to be carried and soothed, quieted and fed. She recalls crossing the long stretch of pasture. She'd needed Shira to walk on her own, but Shira kept kicking off her shoes and reaching for Rosha to pick her up. Over and over, Shira complained that her Tata would have carried her. Rosha dragged her in her stocking feet until Shira pleaded, promised to wear her shoes and walk. You can arrange for this? As I told you, I know someone who does this work, my sister, actually. Rosha drops to her knees, disconcerted as the trust she's placed in Christina clouds with doubt. Her sister knows of our hiding? What guarantee is there that she will keep Shira safe? Instinctively, Rosha's fingers go to where her wedding ring used to be. She looks around the tight space of the loft. It has been exhausting to keep Shira hushed up day and night. Your sister, she would accompany Shira to a convent? Yes. Why do you help us so, Rosha blurts. Christina's motivations continue to confound Rosha. Might she like separating Rosha from her girl, a way of punishing her for Henrik's attentions? Christina looks squarely at Rosha. In God's eyes, your child is no different than mine. She deserves every chance to live. Rosha looks away, chastened. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you. Everyone show some love to Jennifer. That was amazing. That was so tense too. That small moment of the tapping made so big, and the thought too of having to force the child to walk longer than the child wants to, and that sense of danger. It really hits. It's amazing. Thank you so much. I have some questions for you, and there's interesting connections between you and Danielle's novel as well. But first, I want to share with everyone here we're fortunate enough to partner with Greenlight Bookstore here in Brooklyn to provide books for the evening. So please support our local independent bookstore and support our authors. There's a link there to purchase a copy of The Yellowbird Sings. And my apologies, Danielle, I forgot to share this earlier, but and to get a copy. You cannot yet get Danielle's novel, but you can get her short story collection. So those links are there. Please help keep literature going, and feed your soul and your spirit and your heart and mind at the same time by getting some books. And I'm also going to put out Jennifer's Twitter handle there so you can find her online. Yeah, that was so cool. I'd love to hear, I guess, specifically in terms, Jennifer, maybe you could start, where did the idea for this novel, where did this come from? And for the rest of you out there, audience-wise, if you've got a question, you can either type it into the chat or use the raise your hand function, and I can kind of pass the mic off to you. But yeah, talk to us. Where did this idea come from? And Danielle, you're next.
Well, as you mentioned, I had written this memoir about raising our daughters in a hearing speaking world. And I was at a book event for that memoir. And I was describing how we got our kids hearing technology and we were encouraging their every vocalization. So I was describing how we were so excited if they were squealing or screaming at the top of their lungs. even if we were in a bookstore or a library or a restaurant. And this woman came up to me afterward, and she described her childhood experience of having to be entirely silent. She was hiding in like a shoemaker's attic with her mother during World War II. And so, it was weird. It was like this person whose mother had like the absolute opposite enterprise that I was engaged in. She was trying to keep her child silent and like vanished. And I just thought so much about that child and also about the mother and what it must have been like. And it was like, that was the seed of it. I met this woman and her story just stuck with me. And from there, I started interviewing other hidden children, as they're called, although they're quite old right now. The people who were hiding during World War II are old, but, just listening to their stories, and they were so incredible. I mean, just full of resilience and strength and ingenuity. And then, it just went from there. I ended up going to Poland, and I went to Tel Aviv, and I just ended up doing a lot of research and I just got really focused on hiddenness and the notion of having to hide your child and sort of not want your child to be visible was really powerful, and what it must have been like for the child to be needing to vanish.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing to think about, right? Not just the fear of the parent, but then the frustration and lack of understanding / fear and anger from the child. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long was the process then with all the travel?
It was very long. I met that first hidden child about 10 years ago. So from that moment of the seed to now, it's been a really long time, but a lot of it had to do with sort of wanting to meet and talk to people and wanting to travel and see the settings and etc. So I was really lucky. When I went to Poland, I saw a convent where Jewish children had been hidden, and smelled, I was like immersed in the sensory realities of the mushroom soup and the way your feet felt on the floor. And I mean, I was just really lucky to go also to like a barn where a family had been hidden, and to an area of forest where partisans had camped. And I just, it was very amazing. Yeah.
That is really cool. Danielle, what about you? I was interesting that Jennifer and Danielle, your novels both have these kind of like hidden like secret pathways, like illicit, roadways, moving of people, moving of help. And Danielle, you've worked on your novel for about the same amount of time. Is that right?
Yeah, I published it. Yeah, I mean, I like to say I wrote a short story collection in the middle, or was, worked through it. Yeah, I was looking, oh, it's not up here somewhere. I have a giant bulletin board over there, but my novel began about 10 years ago, I think it is. There was a thing in the New York Times. They used to do this thing about like buildings, and they're basically like, what's the story with this piece of architecture? And we live in Inwood, and there's Inwood Hill Park, which I've been spending a lot of time in, and there used to be multiple houses in there. I mean, this neighborhood was kind of like, I guess like buying a house in the Catskills. You would build a house in Inwood Hill Park. But there also used to be, there was a sanitarium. There was, so the thing in the Times was about the House of Mercy, which was a home for orphans and wayward girls. And I've never really been a historical novel reader or writer. I'm very contemporary. I'm very now. But this idea of like a place where there were wayward girls and orphans just really fascinated me. So the novel began by thinking of the question, like, what if the house still existed now? Why would it? And who would be in it? So actually this whole plot line with Julia, and she was always there. She was always the caretaker, which happens later, a few chapters in, but trying to figure out how this house would exist and why it would need to exist. And that came back for me for the question of like women's rights and what kind of world we live in and what we see and don't see of what's going on. And yeah, I was very like, Jennifer, also like your reading was so like, it was so musical even before you had said it was this musical thing, but just so interesting to have them next to one another, because yeah, it's my protagonist makes a choice to leave, and me feeling like I had accomplished a viable draft of the novel was answering this question of like, what would be so worthwhile for a mother to like separate from her child. So that's the question that I tried to explore as I wrote my way through a draft of it.
And Audrey, I feel like when I think of your writing, it's very place-based as well. I mean, thinking of what Danielle was saying about Inwood and the neighborhood. I mean, and even in your bio, you identify very strongly as coming from the Bronx. I mean, how has your home, how has where you've grown up influenced your essays?
It's so funny that you mentioned the bio, because it's really intentional that like place and like race are there, and I think a lot of writers of color and like a lot of like queer writers need to like get those little bits of who they are out there, and like the first sentence of like anyone understanding who they are. And it was from real, like I mean, when I see the Bronx in fiction, it's always like the Bronx of like the 1940s, which is a very different Bronx. It is a very like Jewish neighborhood transitioning into like, oh, all the poor people are coming, and it's gonna be a time of villainizing Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and Black people. And so place is really, really important for me. And I'm lucky because as a kid, I thought I would be writing like novels. And then as a teenager, I thought it would be short fiction because I read Problematic Fave, J.D. Salinger, and I was like, this is it. And then I really loved essays, and with essays, I can really dig into place. And so it can be a little bit narcissistic and a little bit like, the thing I know the most is the place. And so I try to go ham.
No debate over defending the personal essay in your mind.
Oh no, man. I think the personal essay, here, my secret theory is that if you're good at poetry, guaranteed you can slam any genre of writing. And I think especially the personal essay, but the personal essay is every genre. The personal essay is everything because it's you. And what do you like? Anything in the world. Every person is different. And so I don't think it needs defending. I think actually it's weird when N.K. Jemisin started getting really popular in science fiction, because N.K. is a legend. There was all this science fiction is over because Firefly sucked, and like that's like 5 years late. Who are you really criticizing when you're criticizing sci-fi? Oh, you don't like that like these marginalized voices are getting a space. And I feel like the same thing is happening with personal essays a little bit, in that like, oh, disabled people, people of color, queer people, they're finding this outlet, and now there's this little extra wedge of like, well, this whole genre sucks because this one privileged white dude wrote a really shitty piece because of I'm not going to go off on it, but no defending of the personal essay here. I love it to death.
Awesome. Likewise. And yeah, I was baiting you a little bit with the internet, Twitter
Oh
debate
man,
of the personal essay. But yes, we could go off forever because no, the personal essay needs no defending. But yeah, thank you. That was really well said. And I think you're totally right about that. When non-white voices move in to start decolonizing genres, then it causes this backlash. I see some questions here from the audience and I want to get to. So Ian McCallan asks, how do you find transitioning between stories, novels, nonfiction, etc., even working from essays to essays? What pushes you towards choosing one medium over the other for a specific narrative? Danielle, do you want to take that one? I mean, you just said you were working on this novel for a long time, but then also in the middle wrote a short story collection. So like how did you know you didn't have other novels in there?
Oh, I had other novels. I mean, first I just want to say I'm so when you have a book come out, like everybody wants you to write essays, and I had like a bajillion ideas for essays, and they're really hard, and I have so much admiration for essayists, and I think they're like, and I think there's an overlap between like the poet and essayisting. They're kind of like the triple threat of writing. Like they can do anything. And I have so much respect and like kind of like a healthy fear of them because I think their brains are amazing. and it takes a lot. So I want to say that. So all my essays have been very difficult. Uh, yeah, I mean, I wrote this, I mean, I think so many of us are actually trained up on stories, which makes sense. And I actually like pretty aggressively like teach the short story as a way to enter fiction, because I think it allows for a lot of experimentation. But like anything, they're very specific forms. And I was working on a totally different novel that is dead and will probably be dead forever, and it's fine. But I was having trouble revising it and getting back into it, and so I started working on the stories, which I had some, and it was like a way to avoid the novel. I think that like forms tend to feed one another because they're so different. Like after working on this novel, all I wanted to do was like go write a short story, because it seemed so like palatable to me, because it was just using a different muscle. So I think I used to be a little afraid of like going back and forth, but now I see how training your mind to like work really long or work in a compressed way or write in a certain voice, which sometimes, you know, stories or essays demand of you, can feed like this sense of like relief and release that you need, and can feed your other work. So I've become like a very reactionary form writer, and I think that like I've also had a couple of essays brewing. I know they're going to be harder and longer for me to get out, but yeah, I kind of let those forms play off of one another and use them to fuel different projects.
That's really cool. What about you, Jennifer? As someone who's written a bunch of a variety of places, how do you know when you've got something that feels like, instead of say a history book, a novel, or a novel as opposed to a short story?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say is that this novel, I was on page 11 for like 3 years. I was like, maybe it's a short story. I can't quite get past it. But then it's funny. There was a short story writer who I really admire, and I showed it to her, and she's like, it's not paced like a short story. It doesn't, it has like that sort of, you can tell already that it's going to be sort of a long form thing. I don't know if it's always so clear. I think that, you know, I knew the memoir was a memoir, although that turned out to have like a swath of fiction in it too, because I researched my ancestors. I found these two great aunts who were deaf in the 1800s in this little shtetl, and I couldn't find out that much about them, so I ended up inventing their story. So within the memoir, there's like a swath of fiction, and I don't know. I think it is true that like sometimes the content tells you what it has to be. This, you know, it just shows itself as what it's going to have to be. But I also agree about needing to shift and switch around after doing the long form for such a while, and you know, so long with, you know, it's hard to know what you have to show for yourself. And then there's something so like relieving about writing a short thing that finishes. And so yeah, some of it's psychological need maybe as much as what the content of the piece and thing.
Sure, yeah. You know, shaking it up, shifting it around a little bit, that makes total sense, right? Like just to kind of yeah, play with your process a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Audrey, is that something you do as well? Do you ever work on? I mean, I'm only familiar with your essay writing, but do you flip back and forth between working on other kinds of projects, between working on essays?
Yeah, actually, I think I mentioned like for the longest time, I thought for sure, like as a teenager and all throughout like my 20s, I was like, you're a short story writer. This is your life. This is what you'll never make money. And it's true. But the more I wrote short stories, the more I would take a step back and be like, I didn't have the words for like autofiction yet, but it's like you're trying to tell the truth about yourself through fiction, and maybe this just sounds better if you're honest, if you're just plain spoken about it. And that's what really got me to love writing essays. I mean, I already loved reading them, but I just thought it wasn't for me, because the glut of my reading had been like, just, I don't know, I had like a weird love for short stories for years and years. So yeah, I actually just think that to tell a good story, telling a good story, in my experience, is a lot like telling something very sad and difficult, and like explaining it to someone very innocent, asking yourself, like, what is the best way to get this person to understand the truth of this, um, with the least amount of pain or with the most amount of understanding? And then that's where you kind of find your form. Um, and that might be total bunk because I mostly do essays now, and I don't have the experience that a lot of writers have. But I think a lot of like the journey of figuring out what your form is like, this is how it look, this is how it's best, this is how it exists best, or like this is how it gets someone to understand what I want them to understand. But yeah, I'm a big glutton for all forms, so.
Nice. Don't why choose? Final question here comes from Miranda Beverly Whittemore, another amazing writer here in the audience. She, shout out to Danielle's drink, which looks amazing, but she has a question. She wants to know about researching. Danielle, starts with you. I'm going to broaden it to everybody just in general about research. But Danielle, for you specifically, Miranda's wondering if in researching this book, you've hooked into networks of doing the care that you're writing about, either before abortion became legal or in states where it is basically verboten right now. And if so, what does that research look like? Because Miranda imagines it's both fascinating and heartbreaking, which I agree. What did you uncover in your research?
I was very careful because it is I mean, once you open up that door, it is a huge fucking black hole of despair. And also, I think I became obsessed with this idea in the book that Roe still stands, because so many like, just fictional worlds were like, where abortion access is problematic is like Roe is gone. It's like, well, if you look into it for 3 seconds, you see that it's like, it's not, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's like, it's a very thin barrier. It just, there's so many issues with abortion access. So I did read many years ago the story of Jane, which is a book I highly recommend, which is about the, underground abortion networks. These like, basically these housewives who were just like, people, like men are charging a ton of money and exploiting women and exploiting poor women. And basically they learned that like actually performing a surgical abortion is not that complicated and can be learned by anybody. And so they learned from a doctor, and then they taught one another. I think it's since been optioned. I like Elizabeth Moss to be a movie. There's so much research. So I did research in periods, and then I would pull back. And there's the world we live in right now is just really kind of gross. And there were things that I had imagined in my worst imaginations, like there's, children being forcibly separated from families, and I would kind of write it in and be like, that's so horrible. And then like literally like a few months later it would appear in the news. Like, so I had to build a little bit of a barrier, and I'd be curious if Jennifer had the same experience where like research can be so absorbing, but also one of the difficulties of this book is like, translating that to a reader. A reader wants a fairly simple story, but it's a very complex situation. So I had to kind of dip in and out and, see where I want it to be. And then I had a professor, Peter Ho Davies, who would be like, just make it up. And that was kind of his way of doing it. And so I made up a lot of stuff which turned out in research to be true, which was weird. But then I also, like right now I have an acquaintance of mine who's also a poet and who's like really an excellent reader, and she happens to be an OBGYN. So I gave it to her and was like, tell me if this all seems totally insane. So yeah, it's a tricky thing when all that stuff. I mean, I was also past a research point, and like all these states were just like falling. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think I got depressed in the middle of answering it, but thank you for it. And the drink is a whiskey sour that my husband made because he's really nice.
It's a depressing topic, and yet, Jennifer, how did you how did you manage to kind of either avoid falling into that kind of trap of just like researching and not writing, and then two, also just emotionally kind of
Yeah.
protect yourself from the things you were learning?
I mean, I did a thing where I went and, you know, had these conversations with hidden children, and then I just put all the notebooks away, um, because I wasn't telling any of their stories at all. I mean, I needed to feel grounded, and there was an emotional reality that I was confirming in some sense by each of our conversations. You know, just it was kind of, you know, this astonishing thing that, you know, 75 years later, someone who knows that they were given up in order to live still feel pain, rejection, maybe would have rather had just gone with their parents to the gas chamber. You know, it was hard to tell. There was so much pain, even though they were living these rich lives full of, you know, I mean, and it was so heartbreaking also, you know, from their parents into cages. I mean, and I'm thinking, gosh, you know, 75 years later, their design just was with these people who were managing pain from 75 years ago. It was just really a lot. I think that, you know, having worked in this field of, I mean, this was for me Holocaust studies or whatever, for so long. I mean, in order to just be emotionally okay and get your work done, I mean, there were times when you just literally had to be like, how do I craft a sentence? You know, just think about things like the sentence itself, in order to just kind of detach enough to be a writer about things. But for me, it was like, do the research and then really put it away and then create a story that's completely separate from all of it, but has a sort of a depth or grounding from it or something. So that was how I dealt with it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for your thoughtful, and yeah, it sounds so tough. Writing is so tough. Um, it's so hard, but I'm so appreciative, Jennifer, of your work, and Audrey of your work, and Danielle of your work. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to this great audience for some great questions and for just being here. These events really are wonderful. And I will be back here next week for episode 7 on Tuesday. Wait, I didn't update the date. It's Tuesday, not April 28th, because that's today. It's on May 5th. With another fantastic lineup of Sarah Blake, author of the novel Naama, about the wife of Noah from Noah's Ark, Emily St. John Mandel, who will be reading from her highly acclaimed new novel, The Glass Hotel, and Anna Solomon, whose new novel, The Book of V, is another biblical reimagining of the story of Queen Vashti and the Book of Esther. That should be really cool to hear. If you want to see a full schedule of readers at this point, I've got things booked until the end of May, and June is on its way. There's a link for that, and you can also find the Antibody on Twitter if you want to keep up with things and keep the conversation going. Oh, I shared that privately. There's so many technical difficulties tonight. It's the theme. But again, a big thank you to all of our readers and to your audience, this great audience. Thanks for being here. And Greenlight Bookstore, thanks for providing books. And the Literary Hub, you will find this archived on their virtual book channel probably tomorrow. So you guys, please come back. Until then, stay vigilant and safe and healthy and optimistic, and please keep reading books. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.
I just wanted to say thank you before when everybody else.
It's all Have a good night, Danielle. Go get another
Bye.
drink. Take care.
I know, with my giant orange. Bye. Thanks,
This is
Ryan.
awesome. Nice to see you.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.